No one in that boardroom dared breathe when the cold-eyed CEO rose from her chair in the middle of a board session. She looked directly at the man who had turned her down twice, a single father, a low-level maintenance worker nobody had ever thought twice about. This time, her voice was steady, almost quiet. "Are you really going to say no again?" The room went still as she knelt and drew out a ring. But what left everyone speechless wasn't the gesture itself. It was who he really was, a man this entire company had never once truly understood. Ethan Cole arrived at work the same way he always did, 15 minutes early. Coffee in a battered thermos, toolbox slung over one shoulder. He was 35 years old, broad-shouldered and deliberate, with the kind of quiet that people tended to mistake for emptiness. He worked maintenance at Harlow Systems, one of the largest technology conglomerates in the country, and he had done so for 3 years without complaint, without fanfare, and without anyone asking too many questions about the man behind the wrench. The other workers liked him well enough, in the way people appreciate furniture that never moves, reliable, useful, easy to overlook. He never joined them for drinks after shifts. He never lingered at holiday gatherings. At exactly 5:30 each evening, he clocked out, drove 12 minutes across town, and picked up his daughter from the after-school program at Westfield Elementary. Her name was Lily. 7 years old, with her father's dark eyes and a gap-toothed smile she had worn since losing her first tooth the previous autumn. She collected smooth, flat rocks from sidewalks and arranged them by color on her windowsill. She told her father, with great seriousness, that she intended to build bridges when she grew up. He told her she would. He meant it completely. Ethan kept a photograph of her tucked inside the front pocket of his work badge holder, just a small square of her laughing in the backyard, squinting into a bright summer afternoon. It was the first thing he looked at when he clipped on his ID each morning. It was the last image he carried into sleep each night. The people who passed him in the corridors of Harlow Systems saw a man doing the minimum, a paycheck-to-paycheck figure in gray coveralls. They saw the toolbox, the silence, the way he never looked up when a senior director walked past. They saw what they expected to see and stopped looking after the first week. None of them knew that Ethan Cole held 3 patents in his name. None of them knew that he had once built something that now ran silently beneath the surface of the very platform that kept Harlow Systems profitable. None of them knew that before grief had fractured something essential in him, before he had learned what it meant to stand at a graveside with a 4-year-old daughter who kept asking when mommy was coming home, he had been the kind of engineer that other engineers called late at night, when nothing made sense. He had walked away from all of it, not because he failed. Because staying in that world had felt like standing in a burning house, and Lily needed her father present, not brilliant, not ambitious, present. So he chose simple, he chose quiet. He chose the work that let him be home before dark. Nobody at Harlow Systems noticed. Nobody, that is, until Victoria Hale did. Victoria Hale had become CEO of Harlow Systems at 32, which made her the youngest chief executive in the company's history and the subject of considerable attention across the industry. She was sharp in the way that cut before people felt it. She spoke in clear declaratives, kept meetings under 40 minutes, and had a reputation for identifying inefficiency with an almost clinical detachment. Her assistant kept a running list of phrases she never used, because understanding what Victoria Hale did not say was often more useful than following what she did. The phrase she never used was, "I wasn't expecting that." She used it for the first time on a Wednesday morning in October, watching a maintenance worker fix the electrical panel in her office. The problem had been minor, a flickering overhead circuit that the building's HVAC team had misdiagnosed twice before escalating. Ethan had been sent up without much explanation, and he arrived at her office with the easy confidence of someone who had solved 100 problems before breakfast. He did not apologize for the intrusion. He did not look around her space with the wide-eyed curiosity most people showed when they stepped into that office for the first time. He looked at the panel. He looked at the ceiling. He set down his toolbox, Victoria watched from her desk as he worked, not meaning to watch, but finding herself unable to stop. He moved through the problem in a way that reminded her of something she could not quite name. Not hurried, not slow, but economical in a way that suggested he had already identified the answer before he opened a single panel. 7 minutes in, he stopped. He turned to her and said, without preamble, "The original wiring on this circuit is running backward from the secondary junction. Someone patched it 4 years ago using the wrong gauge. Every time the HVAC draws above 60% capacity, it spikes the load on this line. That's your flicker." Victoria set down her pen. The last 2 technicians both said it was a faulty ballast. They were looking at the symptom, Ethan said, not the cause. He replaced the junction connector, tested the load twice, and had the panel closed inside 12 minutes total. He did not ask for approval before he worked. He did not narrate his process. He simply solved it. As he gathered his tools to leave, Victoria said, "You've done electrical systems work formally. Before this, it was not a question." He paused. "A long time ago," he said, and left. Victoria sat for a moment after the door closed. Then she picked up her pen and wrote 3 words on her notepad, underlined them once, and said nothing to anyone about it. The words were, "Find out more." 3 days later, her assistant delivered a short background summary on one Ethan Cole, maintenance level 2, 3 years with the company, clean record, no prior disciplinary actions, listed specialty, general building systems and HVAC support, prior work history, sparse. The file was thin in the places that mattered most. Victoria noted it and requested a direct meeting. Ethan appeared at her office door at 2 in the afternoon without his toolbox. He stood at a respectful distance and said nothing while she gestured to the chair across from her desk. "I'd like to offer you a transfer," Victoria said. "We have an opening on the Advanced Systems Architecture team. Mid-level engineering, significant pay increase, full benefits package. Based on what I observed earlier this week, I believe you'd be a strong asset." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I appreciate the offer. I'm going to decline." Victoria had delivered hundreds of professional offers over the course of her career. She had been turned down before in negotiations, in acquisitions, in hiring rounds where candidates chose more money elsewhere. She had never been turned down quite like this. There was no hesitation in his refusal, no apology, no request for more information about the role or the compensation. "Can I ask why?" she said. "I don't want to go back to that world," he said simply. She studied him. He did not look away, but neither did he elaborate, and she recognized with a flicker of something that surprised her that he was not going to. He had said what he meant and considered the matter settled. "The offer stands," she said, after a moment. "If you change your mind, I won't," he said. "But thank you." He stood, nodded once, and left. Victoria looked at the door for a long moment after it closed. She could not identify the last time someone had walked out of her office without wanting something. She found herself thinking about it for the rest of the afternoon. Word about Victoria Hale's interest traveled fast in the way all information traveled at Harlow Systems, distorted, amplified, and stripped of its original context. By the following week, a version of the story had circulated through the maintenance floor and the building operations team. The CEO had called up a maintenance worker for a private meeting. Opinions formed immediately. Most of them were not generous. "Probably just a formality," said Marcus Webb, a floor supervisor who had never once spoken directly to Ethan. "She probably didn't realize what level he was at. Bet he does something stupid and gets himself fired," said someone else near the coffee machine. The cruelty was casual, which made it worse. In the break room, 2 floors below, a group of mid-level technicians began leaving printed copies of internal job postings on Ethan's locker with handwritten notes scrawled across them. "Dream big, janitor." The notes were unsigned. The laughter that accompanied them was not. Ethan said nothing. He read the notes, folded them twice, and dropped them in the bin. He ate his lunch alone, as he always had, and returned to work without any visible change in expression. The real test came the following Thursday, when a floor supervisor named Greg Aldridge assigned Ethan a critical electrical fault in the server infrastructure wing, a job that normally required a two-person certified team and a minimum of 4 hours. Aldridge gave Ethan 1 hour. He gave him no assistant. He cited a scheduling conflict with a small smile that did not reach his eyes. The fault was in a distribution board behind 2 locked panels in the restricted basement level. It was the kind of problem that looked simple until a person was 3 layers in and realized the original installation had been done by someone in a hurry, with documentation that matched none of the actual wiring. Ethan went down alone at 9 in the morning. At 9:57, he called up to report the fault isolated and corrected. He had also noted 2 additional wiring irregularities in adjacent panels and documented them with photographs and written descriptions, which he submitted through the building management system before leaving the floor. Aldridge received the report, said nothing to Ethan, and forwarded it upward with his own name on the cover sheet. Victoria Hale read the original submission timestamp. She read the actual author field buried in the metadata. She closed the report, opened the security camera archive for the basement level, and watched a time-stamped recording of one maintenance worker, working alone, solving a problem that 2 certified engineers had declined to touch. She saved the file to a personal folder, said nothing aloud, and went home that evening carrying something she hadn't carried in a long time. The specific discomfort of being genuinely moved by something she had not planned for. A month later, she called him back to her office. This time, she was more direct. She had framed the offer as a technical advisory role, someone she could consult on systems questions, a position close to her own office, one that would allow him to work on problems that genuinely matched his capability. She mentioned the compensation figure. She watched his expression for any change and found almost none. She also knew, when she said it, that she was not speaking entirely in professional terms. There was something else threaded through the invitation, something she had been trying to name for weeks. She wanted him nearby. She wanted to understand what he was. She wanted, for reasons she could not fully defend with logic alone, to know the man who had turned her down without apology and then gone back to replacing junction connectors in a basement. Ethan listened to the full offer without interruption. He was quiet when it ended. Then he said, "I'm grateful, but I'm going to say no again." Victoria felt something tighten in her chest that she did not immediately recognize as hurt. "May I ask what's different about this offer from the last?" "Nothing," he said. "That's the reason. Nothing about the offer is the problem." He paused, choosing his words with care. "I have a daughter. She's 7. The life I had before the hours, the pressure, the way that world consumes everything around it, she didn't ask for any of that. I won't bring it back into her life because an interesting opportunity showed up." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Outside her window, the city moved in its usual patterns, traffic, pedestrians, the ordinary geometry of lives proceeding. "She's lucky," Victoria said finally, "to have someone who makes decisions like that." Ethan looked at her in a way that was difficult to categorize. Not softening, exactly, but something in his attention shifted slightly, the way a door opens an inch without anyone deciding to open it. "Thank you," he said, and left. Victoria sat for a long time after he was gone. She had been rejected professionally dozens of times, and had metabolized each instance into information and adjusted strategy. This felt different. It did not feel like a negotiation. It felt like being shown a value system that operated on a frequency she had not previously encountered, and finding, to her genuine confusion, that she respected it more than anything she had seen in this building in years. She had not expected to feel that. She had not expected to feel much at all. It was a Tuesday in November when Lily Cole developed a fever. It came on quickly, the way childhood fevers do suddenly and with conviction, and by morning, Ethan had called the school, called his supervisor, and arranged to take the day off. Harlow Systems' HR system logged the absence as a personal day and processed it automatically, without comment. What was not automatic was Victoria Hale appearing at his apartment door at 11:15 that morning, carrying a container of soup from the deli 2 blocks from the office. She had gotten the address from the HR file. She had told herself it was a professional courtesy. She had not examined that explanation very closely. Ethan answered the door in a worn flannel shirt with a dish towel over one shoulder, wearing the particular expression of a person who has spent the morning managing a sick child and has not yet finished a cup of coffee. He looked at Victoria standing in his hallway in her tailored coat and said nothing for a long moment. "I thought I'd check in," she said, holding out the soup. He stepped back and let her in, without making it a larger moment than it needed to be. Lily was on the couch under a blanket, propped up with pillows, watching something on a small tablet. She looked at the visitor with the frank, unhurried assessment of a 7-year-old and said, "Are you Dad's boss?" "I am," Victoria said. "He says you're very serious," Lily said. Victoria glanced at Ethan. He did not look apologetic. "He's right," she said. She stayed for 40 minutes. She sat in the armchair across from the couch while Ethan brought Lily her medication, checked her temperature twice, and returned with a glass of juice with the straw bent at exactly the angle Lily preferred. Victoria watched him move through his own home with precision and warmth, and understood for the first time the full weight of what he had told her in her office, that this was what he had chosen, this careful attention, this life organized entirely around one small person who needed him whole. She noticed something else before she left. On the bookshelf beside the hallway, between a collection of paperback novels and a framed school drawing of a green dog, sat a small stack of technical journals. Aerospace Systems Engineering, Distributed Network Architecture. She recognized the titles. She recognized, with a quiet jolt, that 2 of the papers in the most prominent journal had been authored by someone with the initials E. C. She said nothing about it, but she pulled out her phone in the elevator going down and began a search that kept her occupied well into the evening. By 9 o'clock, she had confirmed what she had begun to suspect. Ethan Cole, Maintenance Level 2, 3 years of service, gray coveralls, had co-founded the core architecture that sat at the base of Harlow Systems' primary operating platform. He had developed it 7 years ago, before Harlow had acquired the smaller firm that built it, before the platform had been absorbed and rebranded and credited to a team of 12 whose names appeared in every annual report. He had signed over his controlling interest the year after his wife died. He had asked for almost nothing in return. Almost nothing. There was one clause in the transfer agreement that had survived untouched. A modest equity stake, never liquidated, never mentioned, sitting quietly in a legal document that nobody at Harlow had thought to revisit in 6 years. Victoria closed her laptop and sat in the silence of her apartment for a long while. She thought about the man in the flannel shirt, bending a straw to the right angle for his daughter. She thought about what it meant to build something extraordinary and then walk away from it to stay present for someone who needed you. She did not sleep well that night. The crisis came in February, during a stretch of weather that had already cost the city 2 full days of normal operations and was currently testing the limits of every infrastructure system in the building. At 2:17 in the morning, the primary authentication layer of Harlow Systems' client services platform went down. Not degraded. Down. The kind of failure that triggered cascading alerts across 7 internal teams, woke 4 senior directors, and generated an emergency call between the chief technology officer and the board chair before 3 a.m. By 6, the technical recovery team had assembled in the main operations center, 12 engineers working simultaneously, and none of them could locate the fault. The platform handled payroll processing for over 200 corporate clients. Every hour it remained offline cost the company approximately $4 million in contractual penalties. By 9 in the morning, the clock had been running for nearly 7 hours. Victoria stood in the operations center when her CTO, Daniel Marsh, walked over and said, quietly, that his team was at a wall. The failure was too deep in the original architecture, predating every system diagram they had, buried in code written before the acquisition, never fully documented. Victoria looked at the rooms full of engineers. She looked at the clock on the wall. She thought about the 200 organizations depending on that platform. She thought about the thousands of individual employees who would miss payroll if the system did not come back online. Then she picked up her phone and called Ethan Cole. He answered on the third ring, his voice calm in the way it always was. She told him what had happened. She told him the timeline. She told him the stakes, all of them. There was a silence. "Send a car," he said. "I need to be home by 3. Lily has a half day." He arrived 40 minutes later in jeans and a gray jacket, carrying nothing but his phone. The 12 engineers watched him walk to the central console and ask, without introduction, for read access to the base layer logs. Marsh started to explain the parameters of the failure. Ethan listened for 90 seconds and then said, "It's a synchronization error in the authentication handshake. The timestamp protocol was patched during the acquisition transfer, and the legacy clock offset was never corrected. It has been stable for 6 years because the load never exceeded this particular threshold before." The room was very quiet. "Can you fix it?" Marsh said. "Yes," Ethan said. He fixed it in 43 minutes. He did not explain his process while he worked. He asked for silence twice. He requested a specific configuration file that had been archived in a backup system 4 years ago and that no current engineer knew existed. When the platform came back online, the room exhaled like a single organism. Ethan stood, pulled on his jacket, and said he needed to leave by 3. Nobody spoke for a long moment after he walked out. Then one of the engineers said, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Who is that guy?" It was a very good question. By the end of the week, several people at Harlow Systems were working very hard to find the answer. The board investigation began formally on a Monday. It was driven, primarily, by 2 members who had been at Harlow long enough to hold fragments of institutional memory from the original acquisition long enough to remember a name in a term sheet, a clause about equity, a signature on a transfer agreement that had never been publicly discussed. By Wednesday, the legal team had located the original transfer document. By Thursday, 3 board members had read it in full. By Friday, the complete picture had emerged. Ethan Cole was not simply a maintenance worker who happened to have a background in systems engineering. He was the original architect of the platform that currently generated 40% of Harlow Systems' annual revenue. He held an equity stake that had appreciated to a figure that made the room uncomfortable when it was read aloud. The board convened an emergency session. 2 members, both of whom had been present during the original acquisition, moved to limit Ethan's access to company systems and to quietly restructure the equity clause before it became a public matter. The language they used was clinical: risk management, fiduciary responsibility, personnel framework integrity. What they meant was that they were afraid. Victoria listened to both arguments without expression. When they finished, she set down her pen and said, "No." It was a single syllable, and it landed in the room like weight dropped from a height. "We acquired this company on the basis of technology this man built," she said. "He honored every term of an agreement he signed when he was in no condition to negotiate anything. He has never asked for a single thing beyond what was contractually his. He spent 3 years working in this building, maintaining this infrastructure, and never once leveraged his position for personal advantage." She paused. "We are not going to restructure around him. We are not going to limit his access. And if anyone at this table would like to make the argument again, I would encourage putting it in writing so we are all very clear about what is actually being proposed." No one made the argument again. After the meeting, one of the board members walked past Victoria in the corridor and said quietly, "That was the right call." She was already dialing Ethan's number and did not respond. The special board session was scheduled for a Thursday at 11. Ethan had been formally notified that the board wished to address the original acquisition agreement and discuss reinstating his co-founder status in company documentation. He arrived in a dark jacket over a plain shirt, without a briefcase, without notes. He sat at the far end of the conference table and waited while the board chair summarized the situation. Around him, people in expensive suits studied papers they had each already read 3 times. Ethan listened to the summary and then said he appreciated the acknowledgement, but that he had no intention of returning to a formal leadership position. He was willing to serve in a consulting capacity if the company found it useful. His schedule ended at 5:30. That was not a condition he was prepared to renegotiate. The board chair began to respond, and then Victoria stood up. It was not what anyone in the room was expecting. She stood slowly, deliberately, the way she did everything. She stepped away from her chair and moved to the center of the room. The board members watched her. Ethan watched her. The light through the south-facing windows was very bright, cutting across the conference table in a long, sharp diagonal. "I need to say something that is not on the agenda," Victoria said. Her voice was entirely controlled, but there was something underneath it, a current that the people in that room, who knew her well, had never once heard in her voice before. She turned to face Ethan directly. "You turned me down when I offered you a better position," she said. "You turned me down when I asked you to work alongside me. You made it clear, both times, that you had reasons I could not argue with, and you were right." She paused. "I have spent months trying to understand what it means to be someone who makes decisions the way you do. I am not sure I fully understand it yet." The room was absolutely still. "I am not asking you to return to a title," she said. "I am not asking you to sacrifice your 5:30 schedule or to put your daughter second. I am asking something different." She reached into the inside pocket of her jacket. "You have already said no twice. I don't have a third professional offer for you." She withdrew a small ring box, dark wood, plain and unadorned. She looked at it for a moment, then looked back at him. "So this time," she said, very quietly, "I am asking something else entirely." She knelt, not dramatically, not with theatrical precision. She simply went down on one knee on the boardroom floor, held out the box, and said, "Ethan, I would like to do this properly, if you'll let me." The room did not breathe. Ethan looked at her. He looked at the ring box. He looked at the windows and the sharp morning light and the expressions on every face turned toward him. He thought about a hospital waiting room with plastic chairs and a vending machine that only took exact change. He thought about a 4-year-old asking when mommy was coming home. He thought about the decision to trade ambition for presence, and the years of quiet he had built around that decision like a wall, and whether the wall was still protection or had become a thing he simply no longer noticed. He thought about a woman sitting in his armchair, watching him bend a straw to the right angle for Lily, and the look on her face in that moment, unguarded, something opening in her that she had not planned for. He thought about what Lily had said 2 nights earlier, when he had mentioned the board meeting without specifics. She had looked up from her dinner and said, with complete certainty, "Dad, I like her. She's serious, but her eyes are nice. 7 years old, gap-toothed, collected smooth rocks by color." The boardroom door opened. Lily appeared in the doorway his sister had brought her, as he had quietly arranged, not knowing until now what for. She looked at the room full of people in expensive suits. She looked at the woman kneeling on the floor. She crossed the room at a trot and wrapped both arms around Ethan's waist. Then she looked up at Victoria and said, with absolute sincerity, "Are you okay? Your knee is on the floor." Something moved through the room, not quite laughter, but close to it. The sound of tension breaking, the way sudden light breaks darkness. Ethan looked down at his daughter. He looked at the woman on her knee on the boardroom floor, who was looking at Lily with an expression he had never seen on her face before, open and unguarded, the defenses that usually operated in every line of her posture simply gone. He reached down and took Victoria's hand and helped her to her feet. He did not say yes out loud. He did not need to. He held her hand and stood beside her and let the room understand what it was witnessing. In the weeks that followed, the board formally reinstated Ethan Cole's co-founder status in all company documentation. His equity stake was acknowledged and properly recorded. His name appeared, for the first time, in the annual report alongside the technical architecture he had built 7 years earlier and never claimed credit for. Greg Aldridge was let go in the first round of a departmental restructuring. Marcus Webb was reassigned to a role that carried significantly less influence. The unsigned notes that had been left on Ethan's locker were never mentioned aloud, because the people responsible for them were no longer in a position where their names carried any weight. None of this was Ethan's doing. He had not asked for any of it. He had, in fact, asked Victoria to keep the restructuring focused on performance metrics rather than anything that looked like retaliation. She had agreed to the principle, if not entirely to the letter. She was still herself, and he had accepted that early on. He returned to work in a new capacity, not a corner office, not an executive title, not a calendar filled with back-to-back leadership meetings. He had a small room off the engineering floor, a standing desk, a direct line to the systems architecture team, and a schedule that ended at 5:15 to give himself the extra 15 minutes to reach Westfield Elementary without rushing. Nobody questioned the schedule. Nobody was going to. Victoria Hale did not become a warmer person overnight. She still ran meetings in under 40 minutes. She still communicated in declaratives. She still moved through the building with the focused efficiency of someone who had always understood that time was a resource being actively spent. But she began, occasionally, to laugh in spaces where she had not previously laughed. She began to let silence be comfortable rather than something to fill. She drove to Westfield Elementary one afternoon and sat in the car for 20 minutes before going in. Because she was picking up Lily for the first time, and she wanted to be ready, and she was not entirely sure she was, and she thought it was probably good that she wasn't entirely sure. Lily handed her a smooth gray rock on the drive home. She said it was her second favorite one because it looked like a sleeping dog from one side and a cloud from the other. She said Victoria could keep it permanently because she had enough rocks. Victoria put it on her desk at work, in the corner where she could see it from her chair during every meeting. The three of them had dinner together that Friday, not at a restaurant, not anything formal. Ethan cooked. Chicken, rice, a salad that Lily insisted on constructing herself and that contained an enthusiastic excess of croutons relative to every other ingredient. They sat at the kitchen table, and Lily told a long story about a disagreement she was having with a classmate over whether clouds could feel bored. And Ethan listened with the full attention he gave everything, and Victoria found herself listening too genuinely, without the part of her mind that was always already drafting a response or calculating the next move. When Lily fell asleep on the couch after dinner, her rock collection arranged on the coffee table in a new configuration only she understood. Ethan and Victoria sat on the back porch with their coffee and said very little. The night was clear and cold. The city carried its usual frequency from the distance. There was still a great deal they did not know about each other. There were still walls in him she had not yet reached, and habits in her he could not fully predict. There was still the ordinary, patient difficulty of two people choosing to build something new when they had both, in different ways, been taught by experience how much building could cost. But there was also this, the quiet of the porch, the sleeping child inside. The ring not formalized yet, not documented in anything official, because he had told her he wanted to do it his way when the time was right, and she had told him that was fine, that she was learning to be patient, and had meant it more sincerely than she had meant most things in recent memory. The road ahead was long, and neither of them pretended otherwise. There would be mornings that required negotiation, and evenings that required grace. There would be moments when the distance between their two worlds still made itself felt, and moments when it simply did not matter at all, but they were on it together. And for the first time in a very long time, that was enough to begin.